Good evening to our audience in Olelo Television Land. Welcome to another edition of Bring the World Home. It's a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. And each week we explore the experiences and opportunities that a volunteer in the U.S. Peace Corps has obtained in one of the 132 countries around the world in which the Peace Corps serves. Tonight we have with us Susana Letoto. Welcome, Susana. We really appreciate your joining us this evening.
Pleasure to be
Susana was a volunteer in Ecuador.
Yes.
Which we're out here in the middle of the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And Ecuador is not too far away on the, the northwest coast of South America. And it's a very small country, only about the size of Arkansas, but there's a lot of interest. It's, as I understand it, a petroleum producing country, and that makes it valuable in the world's economy. Susana was a volunteer in special education, in the field of education, and I'd like to learn a little bit about your experiences there. But first, for our audience's sake, we'd like to find out, how did you come to be interested in the Peace Corps? You said something very unusual to me earlier, that was Peace Corps had been an idea in the back of your mind since your high school days. Obviously, you're beyond that now. Just walk us down the garden path of how you got interested in Peace Corps and how you ended up in Ecuador as a volunteer.
When I was in high school, I had a chemistry teacher who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Fiji. Oh. And whenever she talked about her experiences there, her eyes kind of lit up. And it was, I think, still a fairly recent experience for her. And I just thought, wow, it was not just the idea of community service, but there was something behind some of the stories that she would tell us, and the feeling of gratification that she got. And I just kind of put that on the back burner. I always held it there in the back of my head, and I just thought maybe someday.
Was she here in Hawaii?
I'm not sure if she's here now, but that was at a high school here in Hawaii, yes.
Yeah. Well, so that sparked your interest, and you went on to school. You graduated from college, and at that point you said, gee, I guess now's a good time? Or how?
No, actually, I said 2 years seems like a really long time. And so I still kept it on the back burner, and then I went and got my master's degree in education and had some experience behind me. And then I realized, as I was kind of approaching my 30s, that, well, maybe 2 years isn't so long after all. Yeah. Because I had worked about 10 years in the same school, and it seemed to fly by. So then I thought, well, I could do 2 years someplace. And that's when I filled out the application.
And the process, as we've talked about on the program before many times, you're selected. Did you choose to go to Ecuador, or you were invited to go there?
What I remember is, my memory for that particular time is kind of interesting, because I remember being here. I actually lived in Seattle, but I remember being at home on vacation and calling someone up and finding out that I was going to go to Ecuador while I was here at home at my parents' house. And they said that I was going to Ecuador. I had not heard too much about Ecuador in the past, except for maybe that bananas that we eat often come from there. That's about the extent of my knowledge at the time. And but I was really excited to go, and I thought Spanish would be a fairly easy language to learn compared to some. And I was really excited. I remember just, doing that at my parents' house.
Something new and adventure lying ahead across the Pacific.
Right, and since the Peace Corps, the application process seemed so long, it was like, finally, it was just, I just remember experiencing that joy of finally knowing where I was going.
In retrospect, the process was fairly easy and straightforward for you from the time of first filling out an application until you were contacted to say that you had been chosen to serve in a program?
In retrospect, yeah, I think so, because everything in retrospect seems a little easier than when you're going through it. But I think
it was a few months or 6 months?
It was a few months, but it still was a long process. There are a lot of, it's a government organization, so there were a lot of papers to fill out. There's the medical, you have to make sure all your medical papers are correct, and then you also have to make sure that your finances are in order, things like that. I mean, but it was step by step, you know.
Peace Corps makes it pretty easy to follow through, and we hope that some of our viewers might be interested in volunteering in some way, shape, or form, and that's one of the purposes of this program. But let's get to your service. You had told us you were working in education. You were working in special education at that point, and you were assigned as a special ed worker once you got into Peace Corps and once you were in Ecuador?
Yes, well, I knew that that's what I was going to be doing. I was a consultant in special education.
Were you the only one in the group working in?
No, there were we ended up with about 6 of us staying through the whole 2 years, and which was great because all of the Peace Corps volunteers in special education had different specialty areas. So as far as resources go, right?
A specialty of deafness, a specialty of mental deficiency or challenge,
either mental retardation or, like you said, deaf or hard of hearing. Working with learning disabilities or specific types of learning disabilities.
What was your area of
My area was more with learning disabilities, but I did have some experience with working with severely and profoundly retarded adults. But I worked mostly with kids, and I pretty much worked with students who had difficulties with learning and their teachers.
Let's back up a little bit. So you got to Ecuador, and you were assigned to, what's the city here? Can you show me?
Yeah, I was near La Libertad.
La Libertad, okay, and the coast of Ecuador.
The southern coast of Ecuador.
And was that a large city?
No, it wasn't large at all. And actually, where I lived was a really small little town. And but the schools that I went to were kind of in the area. I biked all over that area, past La Libertad, a little bit more to the north and out toward the coast. Just depending on, I guess once I got there, sometimes teachers would pass my name on to someone else, and a teacher would somehow get a hold of me.
The education system there is under a national board of education or a national institution, or you were working for just a local school board or community school or community of schools?
Initially, when they requested a special education volunteer, it was one particular school in La Libertad, and it ends up that I ended up not working at that school as much because there were other schools around that really needed more help, I guess, and wanted more help. I think initially when that request was put in place, maybe there was a different person who was in there and they had some different ideas of what a special education volunteer was going to help them with.
Well, again, you had 10 years or more of experience in the field of special ed, and when you got there, tell us, how did you find the introduction to being a volunteer? Was Peace Corps supportive? Were the local school officials supportive, the community supportive of you, or did you find it difficult to get going, get started, get your feet wet?
Wow, that's kind of a loaded question for me. There was a lot of support in some places, and in other places I had to kind of look for what I needed in order to get the resources that I needed. There was tons of support from my fellow volunteers. They had a wealth of knowledge in different areas, and oftentimes when we would get together for a conference that Peace Corps was having and they wanted us to know about certain things, we would get together and plan a workshop for teachers and put together a workshop and, you know, like kind of like write it out in Spanish, because some of us weren't as good as others were in Spanish, and getting all the terminology down and pulling each other's expertise in those different areas. When I went out to my site, and I think at first it was difficult, not so much because of the resources at first, it was because of the language barrier. My Spanish wasn't that good at first. And then it became, as I worked there, what I found was that I needed even more resources, and so I had to, I contacted people at home or at where I was working in Seattle, and tried to get the school that I was working at involved, and tried to get equipment donated, so like PE equipment.
Well, were the Ecuadorian government and school officials or community that you were in, were they supportive of special needs people in general, or were you finding friction to, you keep mentioning resources, so what I'm driving at is, were you supported by the local people and the local government officials and the local institutions, or were you doing a job that was not really on their radar screen?
You know, in some ways there are similarities to what special education teachers go through here, where there are lots of different opinions and views on how things should be done, and maybe a little bit of a lack of support that they feel. So our task, I guess, was to figure out how they could do what they needed to do in working with the students, with maybe sometimes a lack of support that they were feeling from either there are not very many resources. The area I worked in was a very poor area.
Was it always in a school setting, or did you work in a community?
Like a community center?
Yeah.
It was pretty much, I pretty much worked in the schools. You know, there were other things that I did in the community, but as far as working with students, that was pretty much within the schools. So even if we did workshops on, say, health or AIDS or anything like that, I would still have it at a school.
And how was your relationship with fellow school teachers or school workers, administrators, etc.?
You know, what I found was that the people were so incredibly friendly, and I mean, there's no instance in my mind when I was out there being a consultant, or when I was teaching or doing a workshop, where I felt that people, like there was a friction or anything. They were very open. And even when I didn't have...
Were they familiar with Peace Corps? Had there been other volunteers
prior
to you?
Yeah. And in fact, that's what I was doing there. There was a volunteer at that site right before me. She worked in different schools for the most part, but they were sort of familiar with the idea that someone would be able to help them, or was willing to help them in different areas with education. But I think that I guess the idea for some of them was that I would be doing a certain thing. Like in one of the schools, one of the teachers wanted me to actually teach his class, and but what I found was that I felt more effective if I could talk to lots of different teachers and work with different teachers, and then they could do what they needed to do with their students, because my idea of education and their educational system were really different things. That's what I came to find later on.
And was that, did that stimulate you or frustrate you?
In the beginning, when I was looking back at my journal entries, I know that it frustrated me. And when I finally realized that, wait a minute, this is their home, I need to figure out how I can take some of the ideas that I have and help them to work with what they want to do. Then it became kind of a more rewarding experience, because it was, people involved were more enthusiastic about what was going to be done.
I think that must be the essence of Peace Corps experience, for especially for many volunteers, especially anyways, that you're used to doing things, the quote, the American way, or the way that we learn to do them at home in the United States, wherever we come from, and we want to implement it, right immediately, be accepted, our ideas embraced, and the beauty of Peace Corps is that we get our comeuppance in a good way. Mm-hmm. We learn about other people, and we're able to still show that we have something valid to offer. And in your case, did they embrace your ideas ultimately? And
I think it was more a matter of me embracing theirs. I mean, I feel like I learned so much more from them. Even though, we made a lot of materials for their schools, and I mean, even though there was all of that work going on, I mean, I even feel like today here at home, there are lessons, the same lessons are being learned constantly, where, if I go to a school, or if people do workshops in schools, it's not so much your expertise, but it's how are you going to help people apply what you know and work together to come up with whatever product that you want, in the school system or wherever else, in whatever business. Or
well, you told me that you're working on a doctoral thesis now, and that kind of humility, I think, will take you very far, even when we're calling you Dr. Leitoto.
Yeah, that still sounds kind of weird.
And that's the essence of our program, is what do the volunteers who return to their community and return to the United States bring home. Mm-hmm. Can you expand a little bit more on those, what you were just talking about, what you learned from the people of Ecuador and your volunteer experience?
Wow, I learned so much. One of the things that I learned is the humility with which people do things, and that, I mean, a big lesson for me was that happiness is not circumstance dependent. People could not have electricity and be quite happy. In fact, when the lights go out here, I'm pretty happy about that. Things are calmer, quieter, and no matter how much you have or don't have, you could still share. The idea of community service as being something that you do, period, not something that you do in your spare time. That was a powerful lesson for me. And yet, when they do community service, it's just we're helping each other out. I mean, it's not even thought of as community service. If somebody is having a difficult time with their kid, I mean, we do it here too. We live in a collectivist kind of culture. Many of us come from that, and so my daughter isn't just my daughter; it's our daughter, and the idea of it takes a village to raise our children, and definitely lived around that in Ecuador. Mm-hmm. That another powerful lesson that they taught me is that even if I'm having a difficult time with someone or something, if I'm angry about someone or at something, that I don't need to take it out on the next person. It's still, I mean, yeah, that is there, but it was like such a aha kind of moment where I discovered that, wait a minute, they don't do that. I mean, if they're mad about something, if a friend came and talked to me, even though he was mad, he wouldn't take that anger out on me. And it was an incredible revolutionary idea for me that you could actually still be kind to people even though you had this experience going on in you. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's, and do you think that's unique to the Ecuadorian people or to their heritage, or how do you think that came to pass?
I don't have any idea. All I know is that the people I lived around were just like that, and I came to find out that a lot of them had lived through different kinds of pain. There was one funeral that I went to where I discovered most of the people that I had communicated with on a daily basis had lost a loved one, a really close family member. I had no clue, which is not to say that they're not emotional. They can be very emotional people, but it was that they didn't take out their emotions on each other. I don't even know how to explain that.
Were the people that you were dealing with and working with mostly of Amerindian background or
no,
European background? Or?
The ones that I worked with were mostly mixed, probably, the more mestizo, Ecuadorians. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much in all of the area that I worked in. But there were definitely a few indigenous families in the area, not very many. A lot of them lived in the more mountainous areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that unfortunately nowadays, when we think of South America, the image that tends to jump to the top of mind is the drug-producing countries that neighbor Ecuador, Colombia, and in particular. Was this a factor in the country itself, in Ecuador? Was there an awareness and this kind of preoccupation with drugs and drug trade that we have in the United States towards a country like Colombia? Did that exist in Ecuador, or was it not really a problem there?
It was actually quite the contrary. It was, it was almost a paranoia about having any kind of drug around you. They would even have your name posted on the news and all of that if there was even a suspicion of it. So the people that I lived, there was a lot of alcoholism around me, but there were no drugs that I could see in the Ecuadorian people. Sometimes if I saw something, it was a tourist in the area, that kind of thing. But it was a very peaceful. They're very peaceful people. Mm-hmm. So if someone were going to rob you or something, you wouldn't fear for your personal safety.
Yeah.
So there was none.
You were in Ecuador from 1995 to 1997, and a few years later, in the late 90s, 98, 99, there was a major economic collapse there. Mm-hmm. Was there a sense of that unfolding while you were there? Were the people was the atmosphere more modern and contemporary, or more primitive and rural? Give us, our audience, an idea of your...
There was, perhaps if I were more into economics, I would have seen that coming, but it wasn't like the signs weren't there. The inflationary rate was out of this world, and even as a volunteer, the living allowance that I had almost doubled while I was there, because the cost of living. And I was there when a lot of the corruption that led to what the event you were talking about took place. And so, it really wasn't a surprise. Mm-hmm. But where I lived, the people had so little that it was almost like not touching them anyway, because they didn't have a lot to begin with. In one of the schools that I worked at, sometimes students wouldn't show up to school because they have to choose between going fishing to get their food or going to school, and so they chose to go and get their food for the day for them and their families, even though some of them were really young. So it didn't touch them in the same way that it probably touched people in the cities.
Are you still in touch with any of your co-workers or friends? Did you have close friends that you still communicate with?
I lost touch with some of the people there. I do know what's going on in some of the neighborhoods that I worked in or that I visited. The Peace Corps volunteer who was there before me actually just moved back there to the Galapagos Islands, which is also part of Ecuador. Right. And I still have some contacts in different parts of the country. Mm-hmm. So I still have, kind of a little heart tie to that place in the world, yeah.
Well, you told me earlier that your doctoral program is in psychology. Mm-hmm. And there's obviously a great connection between the needs of special needs people and work in psychology. Do you see that your Peace Corps service is going to continue to contribute to work in the field of psychology? Is there a connection there that you make?
Well, the thing is that my Peace Corps experience seems to affect all parts of my life. I mean, I don't know where that begins and ends. It's just kind of a part of me now. So, but it definitely, you know, when I think about how people are, you know, just everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the lessons also in Peace Corps is everybody has a story, and if you listen, you know, it's much easier to be empathetic.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, it's really hard not to be if you actually listen to other people's stories.
Well, we only have a minute left, and I'd like to thank you for coming out and sharing your story today. The idea of the trials and tribulations that you overcame as a volunteer are not atypical for volunteers. When we go into service, we have the idea of changing the world, and we're often able to in a way that we don't expect to. Susanna, thank you very much for coming to chat with us today and let us know some of your personal opportunities that arose in Ecuador. To our audience, our viewers, we invite you to go to the Peace Corps website and see what we have to offer around the world. We hope that you'll join us again each week here at the Olelo channel for Bring the World Home. Again, a program of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii, which we're both an example. And we hope that our talk tonight and our discussion about what Peace Corps life is all about will encourage you to look into volunteerism, whether it's in the Peace Corps or other local opportunities that present themselves. Service within the community is an American birthright. We hope that you'll join us again for Bring the World Home. Good night.